All right, welcome back to On Texas Football. We are live. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. We're down on the 40 acres, just wrapped up coordinator availability, basically kind of media day. The Longhorns reporting day is today. First camp practice tomorrow. So today we met with the three coordinators, Jeff Banks, Pete Kwiatkowski, and Kyle Flood. Also, CJ, I forget there's 9 other on-field assistants now because of the expanded coaching rules. So Kenoto Hudson, Mark Orfe, Dwayne Akina, Chad Scott, Chris Jackson, AJ Mill. We just run down the list. Got a little bit of time from all the coaches today. CJ, I'll just start with you. What's top of mind for you, specifically with the coordinators coming out of today?
For me, I guess we got to start offensively, right? Starting with Kyle Flood, the eyes and expectations going to Arch Manning, but more so that offensive line. How are they gelling right now? Who's really standing out amongst that group? Well, it's going to be a true battle at right tackle, Jeff. Kyle Flood mentioned Brandon Baker, of course, but Andre Kojo not going to just roll over and give the job to the second-year right tackle out of California. So that's going to be a tough battle going in. And, of course, hearing a little bit more about Nick Brooks, hearing about a Daniel Cruz on the back end as well. I think Texas is very healthy on that offensive line, but how much more can they provide to this offense, in which they struggled a little bit last year in those red zone situations in that running game?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, right now, so we've got, and thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for producing this and getting some audio ready. We've got, and this is what I wanted to hear. I've told everybody it's what I wanted to hear. It was something Kyle Flood mentioned. He was asked about last year. We talked about Texas was a wide zone dominant run team, and he was asked about that, if he had any reflections on it, and he led into the answer that I wanted to hear. So we'll hear from Kyle Flood right here on the Longhorn running game from a scheme standpoint in 2025.
That Sark and I have been together going back to Alabama. Different run schemes have become the more kind of used scheme a year, the more common scheme that we've used. It hasn't always been outside zone. Some years it's been pin pull, some years it's been gap schemes. When we first got here, it was inside zone, and then last year it kind of morphed into outside zone. It was very productive for us over the course of the season. I don't know what that's going to look like this year yet. I think we'll have a much better vision of that as we go through training camp, and we allow these linemen and tight ends to work together. We've got, you guys just spoke to Coach Banks, so we've got 5 players in that tight end room that are trying to figure out what their role is. We've got 8, 9, 10 offensive linemen right now that are competing for jobs, trying to figure out what their roles are going to be. And ultimately, as coaches, we'll figure out what schemes are going to allow us to utilize that personnel in the best way. And it may be outside zone again, but I don't go into it saying, okay, hey, this is what we're going to be exclusively, or this is what we're going to do more than anything else. I think I want to see that in training camp to really be sure of what we feel like is the best thing for this football team, and not just assume because the outside zone might have been best last year that it's going to be best again.
He added, CJ, that they're not going to – their schemes aren't running back dependent. He said they feel like they've got complete backs. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. Don't go into camp with any preconceived notions. Let your backs get healthy. Let the offensive line come together, figure out what they do well, and let the run game develop organically. CJ, that was the best thing I heard today, because it's exactly what I hope to hear from Kyle Flood.
Yeah, don't try to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? That's what Texas hasn't necessarily done, but they've been limited in what they've been able to do given their situation at running back a year ago. Obviously, this year, you're expecting more of a versatile room with all of the options, the return of a C.J. Baxter as well. So what more can you do that really opens up that running game and takes some weight off of the shoulders of the passing game in Arch Manning? That, to me, of course, going to be the big point of emphasis in the spring. And, Jeff, I know it doesn't mean much in those scrimmages. When one side of the ball does well, it means the other side maybe doesn't do well. But I want to hear that this offense, the offensive line specifically, is moving bodies up front.
Let's get to a question really quick. Cisco Diaz asked, of the new assistant coaches, who stood out to you the most? So we'll go on both sides of the ball, because there's a lot to take in. For what were we up there, CJ? About 2 hours, hour and a half. A lot to take in. But of the new assistants, I really dug Alan Clark, just getting to talk to him about passers. I mean, he came out and said Colin Simmons is a great player, talented player who left a lot of meat on the bone last year. Oh, that might be hard to digest because of the year he had. But he's excited to work with Colin Simmons, get the most out of him. He even talked about developing a guy like Zeno Mazzulo, like getting a guy from the ground up and getting to develop those traits. He talked about working with PK, how, he's never been – Leon Clark said he's never been around a defensive coordinator who was a defensive front guy like PK is. So their relationship has to be really, really tight, and it is. So I really like what I heard from Leon Clark too, right?
Yeah, we were up there for quite a while, just long enough for me to get a parking ticket. So starting the season off strong over here, Jeff. But I mean, look, that's interesting for Alan Clark to say that about Colin Simmons, who was only the best freshman in all of college football a year ago. So that should give you a lot of optimism for what is to come in 25 for one of the game's best defensive players in the country. But I got to sit around and talk with new passing game coordinator, assistant quarterbacks coach Mike Bamonte, who got the promotion this year into one of those on-field assistant coaches. And look, I know that there are a lot of quarterback gurus in this room now, right? Talk about Steve Sarkisian, AJ Milby, obviously, Kyle Flood, more offensive line, but as an offensive coordinator, certainly has to work with the quarterbacks. Sitting there and talking to Coach Bamonte, the addition of a Matthew Caldwell might be as underrated of an addition as anything Texas added to its roster in 2025. Just knowing that you have a veteran experience in that room that's not Arch Manning, that's huge, especially in this physical sport in which guys get dinged up. We obviously know, having watched Texas over the last few years, you're likely going to need that second quarterback. But he spoke very highly of Matthew Caldwell coming in, wanting to work, wanting to prove, sitting in, and just basically being a sponge since he started living in Austin. I think that's a big point of emphasis there. And, of course, moving forward, how much more can that push a Trey Owens and a KJ Lacey behind the scenes as well? All competition's good competition, especially at that quarterback spot.
Yeah, I chopped it up with AJ Milby for a little bit, and he said the big thing that he had to do revolving around Matthew Caldwell's recruitment was, one, it'd be really honest with Trey Owens and KJ Lacey. And the reason why they went and got Matthew Caldwell is probably for the reason we all suspected. He just felt they were too young, too inexperienced in the quarterback room behind Arch, so they wanted to add a veteran presence. And what I really dig is he said they had to be really honest with Matthew Caldwell. And I think AJ Milby's exact phrasing was, hey, you got to be living under a rock to want to come to Texas and not know what you're getting into. So they had to let him know, hey, Arch is the guy. Here's what you're going to be competing for if you come here. But I think, CJ, that speaks to a guy with really high football character, a guy with a competitive spirit. And AJ Milby said Matthew Caldwell's brought a lot of that to the room. He's pushing everybody. So, I don't want to oversell the move of Matthew Caldwell, but I know you said Mike Bamonte talked about it. AJ Milby talked about it. I'm sure Sark will say it at some point. They've had to go into the depth at quarterback, pretty much once was
every
for
year.
The first year was for performance issues with going from Hudson Card to Casey Thompson, but in 22, 23, and 24, they've had to go to the backup quarterback at some point because of injury. So that number two quarterback, that battle is something that I think everybody needs to follow. And whatever breadcrumbs we get coming out of camp, monitoring that battle for QB2 is really, really big. Because if Trey Owens wins it, CJ, he'll have been pushed by Matthew Caldwell. But if Matthew Caldwell wins it, you'll know, like, hey, this was a legit competition, and he ended up being the right guy. So I love that they've generated some competition for that backup spot.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And look, I know that there's some conversation in the chat right now. I'll take this point from Elijah saying you disagree with the statement that Trey Owens is inexperienced and Arch is inexperienced too. Look, Arch only has 2 career starts, right? But he's played well in those 2 starts. He's gone on the road and taken snaps in the Cotton Bowl, taking snaps against Texas A&M. I believe Trey Owens has only attempted 4 career passes, plus that extra year, not just on the field, in the film room of development, knowing the system, learning the schemes and the concepts, but an extra spring, an extra summer, and now an extra fall camp. That's the difference there. And on top of that, you now have a guy also in that room who has been there and done that. But, Jeff, I do want to pivot just a little bit to special teams because we got to talk with Jeff Banks as well. We also got to learn a lot about what that unit might look like. He mentioned a couple of newcomers. He said Grayson Littleton, Nick Townsend, Lance Jackson, all going to be freshmen, incoming guys that play on teams very quickly. for Texas this fall, but he also kind of peeled back a little bit of the curtain and talked about who those returners are going to be. Ryan Niblett, DeAndre Moore, and Trey Wisner, who we didn't get to see a year ago returning kicks and punts because Texas was just, quite frankly, that thin at the running back position. But all in all, I know that's been a big question of who's going to be fielding kicks. Well, going into camp, we've got 3 names right now that we can work on and build from going into camp tomorrow.
Yeah, one thing that I like that Jeff Banks hit on when talking about special teams was the penalties last year. And he said that was basically his main issue with kickoff returns. Let's acknowledge our super chat too, by the way. Colt, hope you're doing well, buddy. Thank you for the super chat. But in terms of the kickoff return game, they didn't get that many opportunities, and it seemed like the opportunities they did get, they were really hampered by penalties. And I think Jeff Banks said, look, that's on him and that's on the coaches to fix some of those penalty issues from last year. I'm excited about the addition of Jack Bowmeister. I'm excited about the addition of Mason Shipley. I think the punting game and the field goal kicking will be more consistent than last year. Will it be at a championship level remains to be seen, but I think at the very least it's going to be more consistent. But, yeah, the penalties are something that really needs to get cleaned up because we talked about it ad nauseum, CJ, throughout the summer. As good as the Texas defense was, they were one of the worst field position defenses in the country, whether it was turnovers or penalties, whatever, putting them on short fields. The kick return penalties, special teams penalties, can hurt your offense too. It's your odds of driving the ball on somebody 80-plus yards, your odds of scoring on that drive diminishes greatly as opposed to if you get it around midfield or between the 40s or wherever. So, penalties got to get cleaned up on special teams.
Yeah, certainly. MJF asks, who might be the gunners that we see this year? Look, one of the first names that we heard from Jeff Banks was Xavier Filsaime has been a guy that has certainly impressed on that special teams unit. Grayson Littleton, another. Cade Phillips, you can expect to be in some sort of role on special teams as well. But, Jeff, I think that special teams unit is becoming more and more clear. The other thing that we heard from Banks is, look, you got a senior holder. You got a senior kicker. You got a senior punter now. You don't necessarily have to work with that inexperience or just young kickers and young legs in that special teams department. Adding a Jack Bowmeister who's been there and punted in big game situation. Mason Shipley, 30 of 34 over the last 2 years, able to kick in big games. Well, now you have that confidence that you maybe didn't necessarily have due to that unit being a little bit inexperienced a year ago. Going into this year, that's going to be a big point of emphasis as well. But right now, a lot of different names that we're hearing as gunners, return men as well. It'll all be sorted out over the next 2 weeks.
We'll get off of special teams here in a second. But, CJ, were you as surprised as I was that Jeff Banks didn't sugarcoat Bert Auburn's struggles last year, number one and number two? When he was asked about the addition of Mason Shipley, he said, look, we got to a point where we couldn't count on the field goal unit in that 45 to 55-yard range. I mean, he didn't sugarcoat it at all. They weren't happy with the decline of Bert Auburn last year. And I think that speaks to, I don't know if it's a development thing with Will Stone, what it is, but they wouldn't have gone to the portal unless they really felt like they need – let me re-rack. They wouldn't have gone to the portal to get a kicker if they felt like they had an answer in that 45 to 55 range. And clearly they felt they did.
Hey, Jeff Banks also kind of subsided some of that heat on him and that kicking unit a year ago, saying, hey, we'd love to score a little bit more touchdowns, which I think all Texas fans would like to agree with as well. The point being, you got to have a big leg, and that was one of the biggest enticement, or one of the more enticing factors for Mason Shipley is, hey, he's making kicks in that 50 to 55 range. Again, when you're typically in that range, Steve Sarkisian more times than not has proven that he would like to go for it, given a favorable down and distance. But all in all, Jeff, I think this is an area where you should certainly see improvement, and especially in those high-pressure situations.
Yeah, I want to get back to, I think it was Elijah's question or comment about, Trey Owens and Matthew Caldwell. To me, it's not about, quote-unquote, better, who's the better quarterback. It's about, depending on when and where the backup would need to be called upon, you may want a more experienced guy. Look, if there's, hopefully, knock on wood, cross your fingers, you don't need a backup quarterback at any point in the Ohio State game unless you're that far ahead at the end of the game, which I think a lot of us would find hard to believe at this point. But if you needed a backup quarterback to step in the Ohio State game, I don't know that you would want a guy that has pretty much next to zero experience at the college level. Yes, it's in the Sun Belt, but at least Matthew Caldwell has taken a snap, a meaningful snap in a college game. You can't say that about Trey Owens or KJ Lacey right now. So again, I don't want to overcook that storyline in camp, but the backup, the battle for QB2 is really important.
Hey, on top of that, Ohio State did go add their transfer quarterback of their own, Eli Brickhander out of Houston Christian. You know, they're in the same situation in which you have Julian Sane, who's attempted about 20 passes in his career, and then absolutely nothing after that. So it's one of those things where you just absolutely have to have some sort of experience once you get acclimated to the system. Jeff, before we move over to defense, you got a quick word for our sponsor. Is that Advanced Pain Care as well?
Yeah, and I don't need to tell you about Advanced Pain Care because we're going to let a couple of lifetime Longhorns tell you all you need to know about Advanced Pain Care.
Pros know the pain stops here.
Physical therapy helps me as an athlete then and now. And do I still need therapy? Yes. And Advanced Pain Care helps with that.
Injuries will stack up. They'll add up. You can't let those injuries get you down, and Advanced Pain Care has been very helpful for me.
We can help with whatever's got you down, from nerve damage to our spinal cord stimulator. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Same-day appointments available.
Advanced Pain Care. The pain stops here.
Always good to hear from VY and Colt. As a matter of fact, AJ Milwee said Colt was in the building last week and was going over the quarterbacks on 2-minute drill stuff. So, hey, doesn't get much better in terms of learning how to operate a 2-minute drill at the college level than hearing it from Colt McCoy. CJ, let's go over to defense. I'll say PK was PK. That's not good or bad. It's just PK is just not going to give you a whole lot. He did get into some personnel things, but Joe Z, I believe it's Joe Z, asked a question. Yes, did Kenny Baker mention Murad Watson? CJ, I saw you hanging out with Kenny Baker for a little bit. I didn't make my way over there. Did Kenny Baker mention Murad Watson while you were over there?
And one of the questions was how much of a role could we expect to see from Murad Watson this year? And Kenny Baker, quite frankly, just came out and said, hey, we didn't go get him to stand on the sideline and look pretty, right? You know, this is going to be a guy that factors into the defense almost immediately. And I think that's what Texas fans and most college football fans would come to expect with a freshman All-American, especially one transferring into a room with a lot of opportunity, a lot of brand new faces, a lot of guys working to earn their role. There were three names that I heard repeatedly talked about from Kenny Baker. It was Cole Brevard, who, look, the big change for Brevard is going from what he believed to be a zero technique and a true nose to now playing maybe some 3-tech, maybe sliding into a 2-eye or moving all the way up to a 4-eye in this Texas unit. Baker said that right now that's going to be part of that change for Cole Brevard is getting used to a number of different alignments on that interior defensive line. Alex January was another, of course, I think we are all expecting a big jump for January, who got to see a lot of run in that Cotton Bowl a year ago. And, of course, Murad Watson. Those are the three that I'm hearing a lot of right now on that defensive line. But Kenny Baker spoke very highly about Travis Shaw being in the position that he's supposed to be in right now. Lavon Johnson, very much the same. And, of course, those two incoming freshmen who Texas is very, very high on, Josiah Sharma and Myron Charles. But, Jeff, I wanted to add one more note because I thought it was pretty interesting. There might be some back and forth, maybe a little bit of a teeter-totter from Kenny Baker and Alan Clark in terms of not just Justice Terry, but Lance Jackson. Lance Jackson arrived in the winter at around 270, 275 pounds, got all the way down to about 250 over the summer. And now is working all the way back up to about 260. That's where he sits at the moment per the Texas roster. But you see that there's a weight fluctuation, trying to add more of that refined college weight, that college armor, if you will. So for now, both Justice Terry and Lance Jackson are getting run on the interior and on the edge. They're working with Alan Clark and Kenny Baker. Specific position times, specific periods of practice. They'll have designated times with both of those coaches.
And we talked a lot about the defense going positionless. And it's not like some philosophical change where PK and company are reinventing the wheel. That's just kind of the way football is going. I think you can do that to an extent with defensive linemen if you've got guys where their body types will allow them to effectively play multiple shades. look, it's all about manufacturing as much depth as possible and maximizing your best 11 guys. And whether that's, if it's 11, if it's maybe you got 12, 13, 15, 16 guys you consider starters, the more things you can do with them to keep them on the field, the better off you're going to be. So I love what they're doing with Lance Jackson and Justice Terry. I'll say this too, CJ, going back to offense real quick. Jeff Banks seemed really excited when he was talking about Lance Jackson. It was really hard for him to hide his excitement when he was talking about Nick Townsend. Like he talked about Jack injuries and, Emery Winston and Jordan Washington, but Jeff Banks lit up when he was talking about Nick Townsend. Like even if it's on teams early and then with an evolving role on offense, Nick Townsend's going to play some pretty significant snaps for this team pretty early on.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I think you can kind of separate that crew of young incoming true freshmen that are going to see the field immediately. I think Cade Phillips and Grayson Littleton are in there on special teams, but Lance Jackson, Nick Townsend, we heard their names almost at every different coordinator availability, Jeff. And then speaking with position coaches, I think they're already envisioning the troubles or, some of the benefits of having these guys in their rooms they'll have over the next few years. Oh, you're muted, Jeff.
Two coaches I want to get to because we got some questions about both of them. Start with Dwayne Akina because I hung out with Coach Akina for about 15 minutes. He confirmed two things. It is still an insult if guys in his room, if somebody calls you a cover corner. So it's good to know that hasn't changed since his first go around. And Rod Babers is still on the gold tape. So congrats to Rod for still making it on there. But no, I talked to Coach Akina. One of the things I asked him was kind of bringing Sark's vision of being, and CJ, we've heard Sark use this term, being more stickier in man coverage, just wanting to play more man, wanting to be more aggressive. And I asked Coach Akina about bringing that vision to life. And he pretty much said, hey, that's why he's here. He's not here to, really reinvent anything from a scheme standpoint. It's to fit in and, playing more press man, being physical at the line of scrimmage. That's what he's here to help do. And he's here to mentor Kenoto Hudson and Mark Orfe. The relationship he had with Johnny Nansen, that's going to benefit this team from a coverage standpoint. And you got to remember, Dwayne Akina, his role is as defensive pass game coordinator. And one thing I found fascinating was not coming back this time around, but before the 24 season, when the idea was floated around of him coming back as an analyst, he talked about coming to campus and meeting with PK and digging PK, and they vibed on a lot of things, and him kind of getting a look under the hood. It didn't work out, but that really prepared him when this opportunity came up to come back and feel like he could come in and make a difference. So Dwayne Akina is not here to just, tell old stories about, the glory days of DBU. Like, he's here to make a difference. And he basically said, look, my job is get with PK, figure out, hey, what do you want to do in the front? And then it's his job to make sure the coverage is tidy on the back end. I think Johnny Nance is going to be a good go-between between them. And Dwayne Akina is fired up, CJ, to be back clearly. And he talked about some of the young guys who have a chance. That's one of his terms. Like, hey, he's got a chance. He said Jonah Williams is a guy that has a chance. He's excited about Amanda Muhammad. He's excited about Jelani McDonald. So loves where Texas is right now from a personnel standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, hard not to be, right? You look at that safety room. I got to speak with Kenoto Hudson and Mark Orfe a little bit about their rooms as well. And look, that versatility is everywhere. Michael Taft spinning down, getting some room at nickel. Kenoto Hudson said he got a little bit of time with Jonah Williams as a nickel earlier in the summer when he first arrived as well. So, look, they're plugging and placing and trying to find the 5 best or 6 best guys on the field at any given position. Speaking with Orfe as well, he kind of carried over that same excitement, right? Hey, looking right now, you got about 4, maybe 5 guys in that conversation to get a lot of time. Manny Muhammad, obviously, Jalen Gilbo, Kobe Black. We heard Warren Roberson's name, and of course, Cade Phillips was also mentioned. But you start moving around a lot of these pieces, and who might be able to fill in at some of those star positions, whether it be a Michael Taft, a Jonah Williams. Wardell Mack is in that conversation as well. But they're really starting to utilize that versatility and plan ahead to what an individual game weekend might entail, where they might have to spin down a larger body to that nickel spot or go lighter in the box to play for a spread offense. It's going to be interesting, but right now, so much versatility that if you're Coach Akina, Coach Orfe, or Coach Hudson, it's hard not to be excited with the pieces that you have in your cupboard.
CJ, you spent some time with Chris Jackson too. Anything from a wide receiver standpoint jump out at you?
Yeah, he said Parker Livingstone right now has been working with the ones over there in the summer, trying to get Emmett Mosley up to speed. Of course, that was what the case was in the spring, right? It was basically the Parker Livingstone show while DeAndre Moore and Ryan Wingo were sidelined. It was Livingstone who was basically working almost by himself in that wide receiver room as they were trying to get a Dalen McCutcheon up to speed, as they were trying to get, some of these young freshmen and Aaron Butler up to speed. But right now, look, Chris Jackson said 4 guys he feels really good about, and then it's who stands out next. And he said for Aaron Butler specifically, it's about finding what he does really well and finding a place for that into this system. He said, look, feel good about 4. Where can he kind of find his niche? Because Ryan Niblett moving back to the offensive side of the ball, you'll see him in those 20 personnel packages with the 2 backs on the field. He's playing some slot as well. But on top of that, one of these freshmen is going to have to be a kid that steps up and cracks that rotation to make sure that Texas has that adequate depth and ultimate talent that there's necessary on this field.
CJ, let's go rapid fire a little bit. A couple of questions about the running backs. I spent a little bit of time with Chad Scott. He's really impressed with Christian Clark's recovery. I didn't hear him say anything about CJ Baxter's recovery. I don't know if you did, but I don't know that it's going to differ that much from what Sark said, which is they're going to be very careful with him, bring him along slowly. No need to rush it. I don't know if Chad Scott got into that at all today.
I did not hear anything. Again, more of the same. It's make sure that we're not pushing him too quickly. Make sure that he has a full 16-game slate ahead of him if he's able to make it. And, again, those games at the end of the season are significantly more important than the ones at the beginning of the season, Jeff. So just easing him in, making sure that he hits the field running literally at 100%.
Yeah, MJF asked, did Flood talk about which O-line would make the line calls, Hudson at center or maybe Cam Lagarde? Look, he didn't get into line calls specifically. That's typically the center's job, but Kyle Flood couldn't have been more confident, CJ, in Cole Hudson taking over in center. I mean, other than maybe Trevor Gooseby at left tackle, I think of the positions up front, I think his confidence, the confidence he expressed in Cole Hudson, might have been right behind Trevor Gooseby if you're power ranking how confident Kyle Flood sounded about his guys.
Look, he had a lot of love for Jake Majors, being that vocal mouthpiece, being the quarterback of that offensive line. And to your point, Jeff, it does sound like that is going to be Cole Hudson, a guy that's embraced that leadership role over the summer, coordinating those offensive line workouts as well. You have to be a vocal piece if you're going to play center. You have to be a guy that can call out stunts and twists and changes in formations up front. Right now, it sounds like Cole Hudson's checking every box right now. And, of course, he's being pushed by Daniel Cruz and Connor Robertson at that position, probably as healthy as we've ever seen that position at the moment, Jeff, since Sarkisian and Flood arrived.
Yeah, I want to go back to running back real quick and just reiterate that a couple of things. One, Christian Clark's recovery from the Achilles has been, I think it's surpassed everybody's expectations. 2, I think we need to remember CJ Baxter's knee injury, you're dealing with multiple knee ligaments. So this isn't just even your normal run-of-the-mill like ACL tear. Like this was like multiple ligament injury. And, he's probably not going to be ready to roll by the Ohio State game, but that's okay because this staff is planning out on a 15, 16-game season to go win a national championship. So they want to make sure when CJ Baxter comes back that he's 100% ready to go and you minimize the risk of a setback. And 3, when you talk about running back, Kyle Flood mentioned it, Chad Scott mentioned it. When it seems like everybody's talking about other running backs, they're quick to remind you, look, we've got a 1,000-yard rusher that's coming back. He's the returning leading rusher in the SEC. Jeff Banks even talked about Trey Wisner. Like this staff loves Trey Wisner from a leadership standpoint, from a physicality standpoint, a work ethic standpoint. So I'm not ready to sit here, CJ, and say Trey Wisner is going to have another 1,000-yard season, but let's not discount him in this running back picture.
No, I totally agree. In fact, I would kind of picture him to be the number 1 guy moving forward, and we'll see who emerges. Will it be a Christian Clark? Will it be a Jarrett Gibson, James Simon? But, for CJ Baxter, that slow roll back into things. At least you have a guy that's been there and done that against some of the biggest opponents that you've seen on your roster or on your schedule a year ago. Texas A&M, Oklahoma, he ran for almost 350 yards combined in those 2 games. That's a great place to build for that position going into the season. And, Jeff, one final note for me. talking about Anthony Hill in that linebacking room, just how many pieces Texas has, obviously with Trey Moore moving back to that position, Brad Spence getting a lot of run off the edge as well, worth mentioning that. But for Anthony Hill in the season that he's expected to have, I mean, Pete Kwiatkowski, if there was one moment in which he kind of blushed up and said, "Ooh, I'm excited to have him back," it was talking about Anthony Hill.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, he, as expected, he didn't get into specifics about how they're going to deploy the linebackers, but he said some of the same stuff Stark said. Stark said, with their depth at linebacker, that's why they moved Trey Moore back there. It helps them. It helps his future. Just anxious to see as we get into camp. And I don't think we're going to see it full on until we get to August 30th in Columbus, but how they're going to deploy these pass rushers, how many different packages they're going to have. I'm really, really excited. CJ, I'll give you last thought. Any final thoughts as we wrap this up?
The one thing that I asked a couple of the, position coaches when we had availability with them was, recruiting nationally. How does that work? Do you feel like, it's a recipe for success? And look, we heard from Coach Orfe, we heard from Coach Baker, Coach Jackson mentioned it, and Kenoto Hudson saying, yeah, you look around at this staff individually, the way that they can develop their position rooms, but also push each other on the opposite side of the ball. That's attractive to a lot of kids across the country. And Kenny Baker said it best, and you'll be able to watch his interview later today on Texas Football. Just saying, what more are you looking for if you're a recruit right now? Texas competing in the SEC, back-to-back college football playoffs, 23 draft picks in 2 years. Oh, and you get to live in the city of Austin with a great education here in the University of Texas. Things are rolling right now, and they're certainly lining up once again for a strong season on the field, which would only compound yet another strong recruiting season and into the future as well.
One thing I got to mention, and this came from our John Burroughs, Michael Taft's working at nickel a little bit. That's from Kenoto Hudson. So he talked about, Michael Taft's kind of taking Grayson Littleton under his wing. But the fact that Michael Taft is working nickel, CJ, I just like the fact that they're not leaving any stone. It's typical of the staff. Don't leave any stone unturned. If you think a guy can help you at a certain position, just take a look at it. And you know what? Throughout the summer, OTAs, into the early part of camp, this is the time where if you're going to experiment, this is the time to do it, because once you get like 2 weeks out from Ohio State, that's when you guys start really getting your plan together to go win a ball game. So I'm excited to see not just Michael Taft at nickel, but see and hear about if there's any other position changes or alignment changes, if you will, across the board as camp goes on.
We'll get that first look tomorrow. And so you can have everything updated on ontexasfootball.com. Any questions, we got you covered as well. And Jeff, we're back, baby. We're back.
We're back. Hey, if you're not an OTFOG, it's all right. You can become one right now. Make sure you get over to ontexasfootball.com. Use the promo code OTFOG when you sign up. That'll get you 1 year of access for $39.95. Again, we're here. Camp starts tomorrow. You don't want to miss it again. The promo code is OTFOG for 1 year of access on ontexasfootball.com for $39.95. Big thank you to Matthew behind the scenes. Big thank you to Advanced Pain Care for sponsoring this edition of On Texas Football. For CJ Vogel, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, welcome.